party of the articulator and the party of the audience. That, in fact, this element that carries forward meaning must be present in both the hearer and the speaker. This is the nature of this spota. So, Bhartrihari starts his Vakyapadya, his exposition on speech, asking the question, how does meaning happen? And how does it emerge from both the speaker and the hearer? So the sentence is the irreducible meaning unit of speech. Meaning cannot be accounted for by only the sounds of expression. And the way that Bhartrihari talks about this is in terms of another element of speech, which he calls dhvani. And dhvani is the sound that comes out of our mouth. He tells us that the sound that comes out of our mouth is not the thing that causes meaning. It carries the potential of meaning, but it doesn't cause or represent the meaning. The meaning is something else, this bursting forward, this bursting out of illumination. So the spota is very much connected with the sentence. This is the main focus, but there is also spota in the syllable. Now this gets back to the discussion that we've had several times, in which I talk about the articulation not being the sound. And we discussed how there are 5 vargas, there's 5 stations of articulation, and that we make different operations at each one of these stations. We make a simple striking, we make an aspiration with the striking, we make an expansion of the throat, of voicing with the striking, an expanding of the throat, and an aspiration, and the 5th one is through the nose, that we root the articulation through the nose. And I made the point that these syllables, that these akshars, are not the sounds, but the processes. Now, I'll make this a little bit more specific and a little bit more clear. Bhartrihari talks about 3 levels of speech. We have a pashanti speech, which is completely unified. This is almost an unconscious speech. This is related to the Shabda Brahman. This is what one might call the word. It's unitive. It's undivided. It contains the element of time only in potential, in a pregnancy, as it were. We come to the madhyama aspect of speech, and this relates to speech and meaning in a mental state, but not yet articulated. And it's here that the akshars, that we can recognize a kind of spota within the syllables, in that they are not sounded. So they are not affected by such things as accent, or even different languages. For example, in Sanskrit we have 50 or 51 syllables depending on your school, and in many ways we can think about this in a universal sense, but then there's some other languages like German, like Russian and French that have syllables that are different from these strikings that we do. But what is not different is that there are only so many possibilities of making sounds, of making these strikings and aspirations and voicings and so forth in the vocal apparatus. And we can relate to these syllables being present and articulated, sounded in a number of different ways. We take a word like John in English, and this ja, which is a very typical, it's a classic Sanskrit syllable. If we say it in French, it becomes a ja, Jean, which is a syllable, a sound that doesn't exist in Sanskrit. However, this ja and ja is basically being articulated from the same place. And if we take it a step further, curiously, I don't see Jan here tonight, but this same John, Jean, becomes Jan in a number of languages. So the ja becomes a ya. We've discussed this before. And how does it become a ya? Because the ya is the semi-vowel that resides at that same varga, that same station as the ja or the ja. So in terms of the madhyama speech, there is very little differentiation, and there is the possibility of a universal way of, or a somewhat universal way of regarding it. But when speech hits the Vikrita, the Vaikari, the actual sounding, then another process really begins. In the Madhyama, we have the entry of time, but time is not fully manifested. We have thoughts that have a unitive quality to it. A sentence or a paragraph could come in one burst, so there isn't a time element in the meaning unit. There becomes a time element that exists among meaning units in thought, in the Madhyama state. But when speech becomes Vikrita, articulated, sounded speech, then that's where time becomes the full midwife of speech. And through sequencing, speech, sounded speech, it's possible, and sounded speech fully manifests. It's the time, it's the sequencing, capital T time, of course, the sequencing which creates the actual operation of speech. So we can say from Bhartrihari that meaning cannot be conveyed or accounted for by the physical utterances and the perception of speech. We're still looking for this element of spota, and to understand how this element of spota takes place. The individual words in a sentence they contribute to the meaning, but they don't supply meaning because actually they are abstractions. If we separate the individual words out of a sentence, they become arbitrary. A word can mean so many different things. It can be applied in so many different ways. It is everything about the sentence and the assumptions or the presumptions that lie beneath the sentence that give the word meaning. So when we talk about the translators that take these important texts, such as Yoga Sutra and so many of the other important texts, and in doing their translation, they use a dictionary to select meanings to apply to a word. This is, according to Bhartrihari, a futile exercise from step one. That this is not the way that one can determine the meaning of a word. The meaning of the word is only the meaning of a word in the context of the sentence and in the context of the illumination, that the illuminative aspect of meaning that is shared between the speaker and the hearer.
Can I step in here with a question?
Yes, please.
On Spota, I'm just looking at an example of a mother speaking to a baby.
Yeah.
Now the mother knows exactly what she wants to articulate, and it arises as Spota in her consciousness or in her mind. And she says something. The baby probably perceives these sounds and whatever, but meaning may not be bursting forth. For a baby, when does meaning then start coming in? Is Spota an innate thing, or is it a learned behavior or quality, or does it arise at a certain age? It's just like if we go back to Milan's question on consciousness, we use the word chit or chitta. You use it in that context. You may have a certain meaning attached to it and know exactly what you mean by that. But for instance, when I listen to the word spota, to chitta, it could convey a completely different meaning to me based on my cultural background. So, can you throw some light on that, please?
I think you have two questions there, actually. The first one is regarding the acquisition of language, the acquisition of meaning, actually, and whether language, whether speech for the baby is a learning operation or whether it's inherent. Now, I'm not going to comment on whether it's inherent or learned. I'm commenting on Bhartrihari. And according to Bhartrihari, this is innate in the newborn baby. What's curious is that Noam Chomsky, who is among the leading cognitive scientists of our time, sees it in the same way. There's a difference, of course. Bhartrihari basically attributes it to past lives. Chomsky attributes it to DNA or basic genetic structure in the human mind, but they agree that speech and language are inherent in the human being, and it's not possible, actually, to learn speech not having speech. So in that sense, there is a kind of spota that exists naturally between the mother and the child. As far as the meaning of these words, the words have meanings within a particular context. This is what Bhartrihari is talking about. That if we isolate this word consciousness and we say, well, what does the word consciousness mean? Bhartrihari would say, well, it doesn't have a meaning per se. It's an abstraction. It's an idea that there is this word consciousness, that the word consciousness comes alive and acquires a meaning when it's used in the context of an expression. And now, it can be used in an expression that is inarticulate. It could be used in another language. It could be used in an accent that you can't understand, or it could be used without proper logic. And in that case, remember that it's not a one-sided story here, that we have a listener who is listening to a sentence and waiting for the final stop, waiting for the sentence to be complete, because the listener can't really know what the meaning is until the sentence is complete.